$80 billion. That's the number every headline throws at you about Canada's fighter jet deal, always paired with fiasco, blunder, or colossal waste. And if that's where your analysis stopped, you believe Canada simply got played. Here's what that framing misses entirely. The real cost of this procurement was never the price tag. It's whether a sovereign nation retains independent strategic options for the next 45 years or quietly trades them away for access to the most advanced warplane ever built. That tension between cutting-edge alliance capability and the unglamorous work of keeping your own options open is the fault line running beneath every decision in this story. What you're about to see is a framework I call the sovereignty premium, a lens that reveals how defense procurement bleeds directly into trade leverage, industrial policy, and geopolitical autonomy in ways surface coverage never touches. And it begins with the integration trap. The moment Canada signed on, what exactly did it lock itself into? And what does that commitment actually cost when the currency isn't dollars, but strategic freedom? Here's what Canada locked into. The F-35 Lightning II looks like a fighter jet. It performs like a fighter jet, but underneath the stealth coating, it functions as a flying data hub, a node in a massive centralized American sensor network. Every mission it flies, every target it tracks, every byte of intelligence it processes routes through systems designed, maintained, and ultimately controlled by the United States Department of Defense. That distinction matters enormously because when you buy a conventional aircraft, you buy a machine. When you buy the F-35, you subscribe to a platform, and subscriptions come with someone else's terms of service. Let's ground this in numbers that should make every Canadian taxpayer pause. Canada's Parliamentary Budget Officer pegged the full 45-year lifecycle cost at $73.9 billion. The acquisition price alone is $19.8 billion. The remaining $53.8 billion covers operations, maintenance, and upgrades, stretching to roughly 2070. And that estimate landed before the Auditor General's 2020 finding that program costs have exploded nearly 50% beyond original projections, adding another $8.7 billion in overruns driven by delays alone. So we're staring at a commitment north of $80 billion for aircraft scheduled for delivery starting 2026, with full combat capability not expected until 2032 to 2034, 8 years minimum before these jets do what they were purchased to do. Now, here's where the sovereignty math gets brutal. In modern fighter jets, software defines capability as much as hardware. The F-35's combat edge, its sensor fusion, its electronic warfare suite, its targeting algorithms, all of it lives in code. Code that the U.S. Department of Defense retains primary control over. Software updates, sensor data links, the critical Block 4 modernization package that unlocks next-generation capabilities. Every one of these flows through American decision-making pipelines, and it goes deeper than patches and upgrades. The mission data files, the threat libraries that tell the jet how to identify an enemy radar signature or classify an incoming missile, are reprogrammed exclusively through U.S. labs. Canada cannot independently update what its own fighters can see and recognize. A new threat emerges, and our jets are blind to it until Washington processes the update. Think about what that means operationally. Canada doesn't get to decide when its own jets receive capability upgrades. America's own Government Accountability Office has documented repeated delays in TR-3 software releases. Full combat capability upgrades have been withheld or scaled back across multiple assessments. So this is vendor lock-in applied to national defense. The same dynamic that traps a corporation into a single software provider's ecosystem, except the product isn't an enterprise database. It's your country's ability to defend its own airspace on its own terms. Picture the scenario. A geopolitical crisis emerges. Canada needs a specific sensor capability activated or a software patch deployed to respond to a new threat vector. The request goes to Washington. Washington has its own priorities, its own timeline, its own strategic calculations about what allied nations should and shouldn't be able to do independently. Canada waits. That waiting isn't a glitch in the system. It is the system. And while you wait, the financial hemorrhage compounds. Every delay in Block 4 modernization doesn't just postpone capability, it forces Canada to keep flying aging CF-18s well past their intended retirement, spending billions on life extension programs for aircraft that were supposed to be replaced just to maintain basic air defense while the F-35 sit without full combat clearance. Maintenance contracts extend. Interim workarounds get jury-rigged at premium rates. The broader national defense budget absorbs blow after blow from a program Canada cannot accelerate, cannot independently modify, and cannot exit without writing off decades of sunk investment. This is the integration trap in its fullest expression. Canada purchased interoperability with its closest ally, a genuine strategic benefit, but the price was operational dependence stretching across nearly half a century. The sticker price bought airframes. The real expenditure bought a permanent seat in someone else's upgrade queue. So the question sharpens. If deep integration into an allied ecosystem means surrendering control over your own defense timeline, your own budget trajectory, and your own operational sovereignty, is there a fundamentally different engineering philosophy that doesn't force you to choose between cutting-edge capability and strategic independence? That's exactly where we're headed. There is, and it's Swedish. The Saab Gripen was engineered from day one for a specific strategic reality, enabling a small nation to fight on its own terms, maintain its own systems, and answer to no one's upgrade schedule. That design philosophy matters enormously for Canada, far more than the sticker price, though the sticker price helps. Gripen EF runs approximately $22,100 per flight hour, according to Saab official data and Czech Ministry estimates from 2025. The F-35 exceeds $46,000. For a 24 aircraft fleet, that translates to roughly $174 million in annual operations for the Gripen versus $231 million for F-35 equivalents. Over a 30-year service life, those savings compound into billions. But this is where most analysis stops and where the real strategic argument begins. The battlefield of modern defense procurement isn't only measured in capability, it's measured in decades of sustained spending. And sustained spending either flows outward, feeding someone else's industrial base, or it circulates inward, building your own. This is the Gripen's actual proposition. It runs on open architecture, and critically, it grants operators access to the mission software source code. In practical sovereignty terms, that means Canadian engineers, not Lockheed Martin's gatekeepers in Fort Worth, control the software stack governing how the aircraft fights, integrating a domestically developed weapon system, pushing a sensor upgrade tailored to Arctic surveillance, adapting electronic warfare suites to emerging threats. These become sovereign decisions executed on a sovereign timeline. Where the F-35 routes even routine modifications through a centralized approval architecture tied to Washington's modernization calendar, the Gripen structurally eliminates that dependency. The difference isn't convenience. It's the difference between renting your defense capability and owning it. That digital sovereignty extends directly into macroeconomic leverage. Saab's Canadian proposal puts a binding number on the table. CAD $19 billion reinvested into Canadian industry, 100% industrial offsets. Between 6,000 and 10,000 direct Canadian jobs in engineering, maintenance, and software development. But the deeper significance isn't the job count. It's what kind of jobs they are and what kind of economy they build. This is the distinction the sovereignty premium framework makes visible. A branch plant procurement model where Canada buys a finished platform and pays a foreign prime contractor to service it indefinitely creates employment, yes, but it's consumption employment. The institutional knowledge, the design authority, the iterative innovation capacity all accumulate somewhere else. Canada writes checks. Fort Worth accumulates expertise. Over 30 years, that pattern doesn't just cost money, it hollows out the domestic industrial base's ability to participate meaningfully in next-generation defense technology. Canada becomes a permanent customer, never a peer, never a competitor, never truly independent. The Grapin model inverts that dynamic entirely. When Canadian engineers write mission software, when Canadian firms manufacture modular subsystems, when Canadian supply chains handle maintenance and upgrade cycles, institutional knowledge compounds domestically. Each iteration deepens the talent base. Each upgrade cycle trains the next generation of aerospace engineers. Over 2 decades, you're not just operating a fighter jet, you're seeding a sovereign aerospace cluster with the accumulated expertise to contribute to or even lead future platform development. The defense dollar does double duty. It buys operational capability and builds long-term industrial capacity that no trade negotiation can revoke. Contrast that with the F-35 architecture examined in the previous chapter. Under Aelitz and its successor, Odin, even routine diagnostics route through Lockheed Martin's infrastructure. Parts flow through a global supply chain Canada doesn't control. Software updates arrive on someone else's timeline. Every dollar spent deepens that dependency loop. The Grapin turns procurement spending into a domestic economic engine instead of exporting strategic leverage to a foreign contractor. But industrial commitments negotiated in boardrooms face a harder test than spreadsheets. Whatever platform Canada selects has to function in one of the most physically punishing operational environments on Earth. Forward operating bases on frozen runways above the Arctic Circle. Temperatures cratering to -40. The nearest resupply depot 1,000 kilometers of empty tundra away. That's where the real stress test begins. So let's put both aircraft right there. January, wind chill pushing -50, and inside a climate-controlled hangar, because it absolutely has to be climate-controlled, sits your $100 million F-35. Here's what most people don't realize about stealth technology. That radar-absorbing coating, it's not paint you slap on and forget about. It's a fragile, precisely engineered skin that degrades when exposed to extreme temperature swings. The advanced sensor suites, the integrated avionics, all of it demands a controlled thermal environment just to remain functional. We're talking specialized hangars, dedicated maintenance crews running around the clock, a logistics tail stretching thousands of kilometers back to southern civilization. Now ask yourself a very simple question. How many climate-controlled facilities does Canada actually maintain above the Arctic Circle? You already know the answer. So what happens when you need to scramble jets from a remote northern base to intercept a Russian Tu-95 probing Canadian airspace over the Beaufort Sea? You need that aircraft combat ready now. Not in 3 hours while a maintenance team warms up the hangar and painstakingly inspects every stealth panel and sensor node. This is the moment where competing engineering philosophies stop being PowerPoint abstractions and become raw survival questions. The Grapin was literally born for this. Saab designed it for Sweden, a country that spent the entire Cold War expecting to fight from dispersed highway strips in subarctic conditions with minimal warning. The operational concept is almost brutally simple. Land on a frozen stretch of highway or a cleared snow-packed runway. A ground crew of six people with a single fuel truck and basic equipment can rearm, refuel, run diagnostics, and have the aircraft airborne again in under 10 minutes. Let that sit for a second. Under 10 minutes on a highway in the Arctic. No specialized hangar, no sprawling logistics chain, no delicate stealth coating cracking in the cold. The Grapin's airframe was purpose-built to shrug off exactly the kind of environmental punishment that would leave its American competitor grounded and waiting for parts. And here's why this matters for Canada in a way it matters for almost no other F-35 customer on Earth. We aren't defending a compact European border or Mediterranean coastline. We are responsible for the second largest landmass on the planet, with a northern frontier that grows more strategically contested every single year as Arctic ice recedes and new shipping lanes crack open. The platform that actually defends that territory has to operate where the territory is, not just where the infrastructure happens to be convenient. So the next time someone quotes you the F-35's combat radius or its sensor fusion specifications, ask one follow-up question. Where were those numbers validated? Edwards Air Force Base, California, the Nevada Desert Test Ranges, not at Canadian Forces Station Alert, the northernmost permanently inhabited place on Earth, where the sun disappears for months and exposed metal turns brittle enough to snap. Paper specs don't survive the tundra. Operational reality does. But here's what stopped me cold. And I mean that. Because as stark as this Arctic mismatch is, the geography problem isn't actually the most dangerous part of this entire equation. The real cost of locking Canada into a single vendor defense dependency won't show up on a frozen runway. It's already quietly bleeding out at negotiating tables where Canadian softwood lumber, Canadian dairy, Canadian livelihoods are the chips being pushed across the surface. April 2026. The U.S. Department of Commerce issues its preliminary determination on softwood lumber. Duties landing just under 25%. For an industry that contributes more to Canada's national GDP than steel and auto parts combined. Let that number settle. The Independent Wood Processors Association is warning of thousands of jobs vanishing. Entire communities in British Columbia and Quebec built around sawmills and logging operations, watching their economic foundation crack in real time. And the tariffs aren't the only assault. Beetle infestations are hollowing out forests from the inside. Wildfires are burning what the beetles leave behind. Layer a 25% duty on top of ecological catastrophe, and you have an industry being crushed from every direction simultaneously. The CUSMA framework, the agreement that was supposed to protect exactly this kind of cross-border trade, is exposed, functionally failing the people it was designed to shield. Pause. Why are we dissecting lumber tariffs in the middle of a structural analysis of fighter jet procurement? That disconnect you're feeling is the exact blind spot most policy commentary never corrects. Standard analysis treats defense procurement and trade policy as separate filing cabinets, different ministries, different experts, different news cycles. The reality is far more interconnected and far more dangerous. The defense lock-in is the trade weakness. Let me show you the mechanism. Think of it this way. You've taken out an enormous mortgage with one bank, your entire home, your family's security, all tied to a single lender. That same bank also handles your business line of credit. One day they squeeze the terms on your business loan. Interest spikes, conditions tighten. You want to negotiate hard, maybe threaten to take your business elsewhere. But you can't, because your mortgage, the biggest financial commitment of your life, sits in their vault. They know you're not going anywhere, and they price your business loan accordingly. That is precisely the dynamic playing out between Canada and the United States right now. The mortgage is the F-35 program. The business loan is softwood lumber. The NATO Association of Canada flagged this explicitly in its 2026 strategic assessment. Over a 10 to 20 year horizon, deep F-35 integration creates what analysts describe as a sovereignty feedback loop. In structural defense reviews circulated through parliamentary committee channels, the mechanism is laid bare. U.S. officials have tied Canada's F-35 commitment to continued seamless NORAD cooperation, raising this linkage precisely during periods of escalating trade friction. The military data network stops being just a defense tool. It becomes an implicit bargaining chip that bleeds directly into CUSMA negotiations. Here is how the mechanics actually work. Canada's F-35 integration means its pilots train on American simulator networks. Its maintenance crews depend on Lockheed Martin's global sustainment chain for every critical spare part. Its intelligence analysts receive threat data through classified fusion links managed from U.S. command infrastructure. Each of these dependencies is a discrete pressure point, not because Washington would openly weaponize them, which would fracture the alliance publicly, but because the leverage operates at a subtler and far more effective level. When Canadian trade officials contemplate aggressive countermeasures on softwood, retaliatory tariffs on American goods, formal WTO escalation, restricting energy exports as a bargaining lever, they do so knowing the defense relationship creates a profound asymmetry of consequences. A delayed software update to F-35 mission systems, a slower prioritization in the global parts queue, a narrowing of the intelligence shared through NORAD's integrated data architecture. None of these would be framed as retaliation. They'd surface as scheduling adjustments or security reclassifications, but the effect is identical. Canada's defense readiness takes a quiet hit precisely when its negotiators are pushing hardest on trade. This is the sovereignty feedback loop in full operation. Integration doesn't just raise the political cost of disagreement in the defense domain. Alliance theory is unambiguous on this. It raises the cost across every domain simultaneously. Canadian negotiators sitting across from their American counterparts to fight for forestry communities in British Columbia aren't operating from independent strength. They're operating as a partner who has already signaled through the deepest possible defense commitment that walking away is not a credible option. American negotiators don't need to state it explicitly. The structural architecture makes the point for them. And the deeper the integration runs, more data links, more shared logistics, more embedded training pipelines, the wider that asymmetry grows. A fighter jet procurement decision made in Ottawa boardrooms about avionics suites and stealth coatings is directly mechanically connected to whether a sawmill worker in Prince George keeps their job next year. One system, one feedback loop. Defense sovereignty and trade leverage are the same variable. So here's what I genuinely want your honest read on. Drop it in the comments. Do you think it's still possible for Canada to meaningfully separate military integration from economic trade negotiations? Or does rooting our entire defense data architecture through U.S. networks mean we've permanently weakened our hand at the trade table? Tell me where you land. Because there's one more layer to this story that almost nobody is talking about. You've probably noticed that Canada's defense procurement process is, by any headline measure, agonizingly slow. Delays stacked on reviews, stacked on consultations. The standard narrative calls it bureaucratic incompetence, a government that can't make decisions. But what if that reading is entirely wrong? What if what looks like indecision from the outside is actually something far more calculated? A deliberate holding pattern designed to preserve the very leverage we've been talking about. Here's your answer. It is calculated, and the proof is unfolding right now. During the 2026 U.S.-Canada trade standoff, the Prime Minister's government did something deeply revealing. They continued making long lead payments for additional F-35 jets, honoring the primary commitment, keeping Washington comfortable. Simultaneously, they publicly and rigorously reopened the review of Saab's Gripen and floated the concept of a mixed fleet. Two contradictory signals sent at exactly the same time to exactly the same audience. If this were genuine indecision, those moves make no sense. You don't keep paying for something you're unsure about. But if this is strategy, and the evidence overwhelmingly suggests it is, then the contradiction is the message. Canada telling the United States, we are invested in this partnership, and we have alternatives. We will keep those alternatives visible for as long as necessary. This is the sovereignty premium framework operating in real time. Every dollar spent reviewing the Gripen isn't wasted procurement budget. It's geopolitical insurance. It keeps a second door propped open so that when Kuzmi renegotiations heat up, when softwood lumber tariffs hit the table, when the pressure to fall in line intensifies, Canada still has room to maneuver. The moment that door closes, the leverage evaporates. And everyone at the table knows it. The agonizing slowness, the reviews stacked on consultations, that's the price of maintaining options. And honestly, it's a bargain compared to total structural dependency with zero negotiating position on anything that matters to Canadian workers and industries. Here's the sharper point. Keeping strategic leverage costs political capital. It costs headlines screaming, government can't decide. It invites frustration from defense analysts who want clean procurement timelines. The cost of abandoning that leverage, though, that's measured in lost sovereignty over trade policy, industrial strategy, and the economic security of millions of Canadians. Which brings us to the deeper reality behind everything we've covered today. The overarching challenge facing Canada and every mid-power nation navigating this era was never about selecting the perfect aircraft. It's about a far more consequential decision, absolute alliance integration, where you gain interoperability at the price of independent action or rigorous structural autonomy, where you pay more, move slower, and retain the ability to chart your own course when it counts. That tension doesn't resolve, it's managed. And the quality of a nation's strategy should be judged by how skillfully they manage it. So next time you encounter a procurement headline screaming dysfunction, pause. Ask yourself, who benefits from the delay? What leverage is being preserved? And what disappears the moment the decision becomes final? That's the lens. Apply it to every major policy story you come across. Defense, trade, energy, infrastructure. The integration versus autonomy calculus is always running underneath. If this kind of nonpartisan strategic analysis is what you've been looking for, subscribe. There is a lot more to map.